Radio repair shops were fixtures in American towns from the 1920s through the 1970s. Then solid-state electronics arrived, manufacturing costs plummeted, and within a decade the trade had virtually ceased to exist. The workbenches where radios once returned to life now sit in basements and garages, monuments to a time when fixing things made more sense than throwing them away. If you tried to get a radio repaired today, you'd spend more time finding someone willing to do it than the radio originally cost. Most electronics stores don't even offer repair services anymore. The few remaining repair shops specialize in vintage equipment for collectors, not everyday fixes. By 1980, neighborhood radio repair shops had largely vanished from Main Street America. The skilled technicians who once diagnosed problems by sound alone had retired or moved into other trades. An entire infrastructure of parts suppliers, service manuals, and training programs simply evaporated. Why? Transistor radios became so cheap that throwing them away made more economic sense than paying someone to fix them. Labor costs exceeded manufacturing costs, making repair economically impossible. But that wasn't always the case. For 50 years, radio repair was steady, skilled work that kept America listening. Every town had at least one shop, and the larger cities had dozens. Picture a Saturday morning in 1955. Your family's Philco console has gone silent overnight. You load it into the car, these weren't portable devices, and drive to Murphy's Radio Repair on Elm Street. The shop smells like hot solder and dust, with a counter separating customers from the mysterious back room where the magic happened. The sensory experience was distinctive, the sound of vacuum tubes humming when the repairman powered up a set to test it. Rows of glowing orange tubes in wooden cases, each one hand-labeled with cryptic numbers and letters. The weight of a tube radio, solid wood cabinets that took 2 people to move, and the particular static and crackling sounds that told an experienced ear exactly what was wrong. The process was straightforward. You described the problem: no sound, crackling on AM, or stations drift. The repairman wrote your name and the symptoms on a manila tag tied to the power cord. He'd quote you a price range, $3 to $8, depending on what we find inside. You'd return in a week to find your radio working like new, often better than when you bought it. The radio repairman wasn't just fixing electronics, he was the keeper of your family's connection to the outside world. He knew which tubes failed most often, which brands lasted longest, and how to coax extra years from aging circuits. The economics made perfect sense. A good console radio cost $150 to $300 in the 1950s, equivalent to $1,500 to $3,000 today. Repair bills typically ran $5 to $15, making fixing it an obvious choice over replacement. Families expected a radio to last 10 to 15 years with occasional maintenance. This wasn't just individual shops operating in isolation, a vast supporting infrastructure made it all possible. Wholesale distributors supplied thousands of different tube types to repair shops nationwide. Electronics trade schools trained technicians in circuit theory and troubleshooting techniques. Manufacturers published detailed service manuals with complete schematics for every model. Even some drugstores and hardware stores had tube testing stations for DIY diagnosis. Radios were precision instruments built with replaceable components designed for repair. The vacuum tube technology was modular. Pull out the bad tube, plug in a new one. Labor was relatively inexpensive compared to the cost of manufacturing a complete new radio. But powerful forces of change were brewing. The first was technological. Transistors replaced vacuum tubes starting in the late 1950s, making radios smaller and more reliable. Integrated circuits in the 1960s eliminated hundreds of individual components. When solid-state radios did fail, the problem was usually a tiny component soldered directly to a circuit board. Diagnosing transistor failures required expensive test equipment most neighborhood shops couldn't afford. Economic forces delivered the second blow. Manufacturing moved overseas where labor costs were a fraction of American wages. Mass production and automation drove the cost of a basic radio below $20 by the 1970s. A repair that cost $15 in labor made no sense when a new radio cost $18. The economics flipped. Replacement became cheaper than diagnosis, let alone repair. Cultural and social changes accelerated the decline. Portable transistor radios changed how people thought about the device. Instead of furniture-quality console radios, people bought disposable pocket radios. The rise of stereo systems and later boom boxes made simple AM/FM radios seem obsolete. Americans became comfortable with the idea of throwing away broken electronics. The timeline of decline was swift but steady. Through the 1960s, repair shops began specializing in television as radio work dried up. By the mid-1970s, most had closed or pivoted entirely to TV and later VCR repair. The last holdouts served rural areas where people still owned older tube radios. Think about the first time your radio broke and you realized it was cheaper to buy a new one than fix the old one. Remember walking past empty storefronts that once housed repair shops, windows now papered over or converted to other businesses. It was a strange experience, throwing away something that still looked perfectly good but simply didn't work. Most people adapted quickly to the disposable model. Radios became like light bulbs, used until they burned out. The few who resisted found themselves driving farther and farther to find someone willing to work on older equipment. Eventually, even the sentimental gave up and joined the replacement economy. What was different? You lost the relationship with someone who understood how your radio worked. Gone was the satisfaction of hearing your old radio come back to life, often sounding better than before. The ritual ended, dropping it off broken, picking it up fixed, paying a fair price for skilled work. The radio repairman didn't disappear because he did poor work or charged too much. He disappeared because the fundamental economics of repair versus replacement shifted permanently. Once labor costs exceeded manufacturing costs, the entire trade became economically impossible. What faded was a particular relationship with objects, the expectation that broken things should be fixed. We moved from a repair culture built on scarcity to a replacement culture built on abundance. The idea that you would maintain and care for a radio the way you might care for a car became foreign to most Americans. The second-order effects were profound. What we lost wasn't just radio repair shops, it was an entire ecosystem of technical knowledge. The skills needed to trace circuits, read schematics, and diagnose electronic failures became obsolete overnight. A generation of men who understood how things actually worked found their expertise suddenly worthless in the consumer electronics space. The question isn't whether this transition was inevitable, it probably was. When you can manufacture a complete radio for less than an hour of repair labor, economics wins. But it's worth understanding what that transition actually meant, not just economically but culturally. We traded the satisfaction of repair for the convenience of replacement. In the process, we lost touch with how the things we depend on actually work. If you remember the smell of a radio repair shop or the sound of tubes warming up, you remember a world that operated on different principles. If you ever watched a repairman bring a silent radio back to life, you witnessed something that no longer happens in mainstream America. If this brought back a memory of a repair shop in your town, go ahead and like this video. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring these vanished corners of American life. Leave a comment and tell us about the radio repairman you remember. What was his name, where was his shop, and what did he fix for your family?